Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boy.
Merry Christmas everyone and Happy New Year. Welcome to another edition of Sysadmin Tutorials. Today we're going to be taking a look at the installation of vCenter Server 7. The way we're going to be doing this is first we're going to be deploying our vCenter server using the GUI method. And then what we'll do is we'll power off, delete the machine, and we're going to redeploy the vCenter server using the CLI method. So not a lot of people use the CLI method, so I just want to show you that because it can save you a whole heap of time. Now the way we're going to be deploying our vCenter server is going to be within another vSphere environment. So this is going to be a whole nested environment that we're building out. So if you followed my ESXi 7 videos, you can see that we deployed that in an existing vSphere environment. So that vSphere environment is pretty much my management environment there. So up on screen here, we do have that vCenter server that controls the management environment. So what we'll do is we'll log straight in and we'll get underway. Once I've logged into my vCenter server, I'm going to click on VMs and templates. Now I've got a few folders here that have previously been created. And as you can see, the one highlighted there is vSphere 7. So that's where we're going to be placing our vCenter server. And you can already see up on screen there that we do have our ESXi 7-1 and 7-2 hypervisors. Now what we need to do is we need to browse to where we download the vCenter server appliance ISO file. So I've already downloaded that. And as you can see up on screen here, it's located in D drive, temp folder, vcsa-7 folder. Now I'm going to right click on this ISO file and I'm going to select mount. Now once the DVD is mounted, we're going to go into vCsa UI installer. We're going to go Win32 and we're going to double click on installer.exe. Now I'll just move this into the center of the screen. You can see with the installer that we have 4 options here. Today we're going to be concentrating on the install option, so I'm going to go ahead and click on that. Now as you can see up on screen, the vCenter deployment is broken up into 2 stages. So the first stage is going to be deploying the virtual machine, and then the second stage is going to be setting up the virtual machine itself. So all the settings that we're about to enter into this wizard are going to then be deployed in stage 2 to the virtual machine. And at the end of that, we'll have a working vCenter server. So we're going to go ahead and click on next. We'll accept the end user license agreement. Now I'm going to be deploying this in a vCenter server. So remember that vCenter server looks after my management vSphere, and that's where this virtual machine is going to sit. So here I'm going to type in the vCenter server address for that. So that is vmvcenter.vmlab.local. So here I'm going to enter in my username and password. The username that I'm going to use is administrator@vsphere.local. So I'm just going to enter that in now. Once those settings are entered in, we can click on next. If you're using a self-signed certificate on this vCenter server, it's going to pop up with a warning. So I'm just going to click on yes to accept this certificate. And here we're going to select a folder of where we want to deploy this virtual machine. So I'm going to expand this and we're going to put it into the vSphere 7 folder like we explained in the beginning of this video. Once I've got that selected, I'm going to click on next. For the compute resource, I'm just going to select my VMlab cluster. If I expand that, you can see that I've got 4 hosts in this cluster. So I'm just going to let the wizard decide where to place this virtual machine. So I'll just make sure I got the cluster selected and then we'll click on next. In this screen, we're going to give the virtual machine a name and then we're going to set the root password. We're going to be calling this virtual machine vc7-1. And now I enter in the password that I want to use for the root user account. And once all that information is entered in, we can click on next. So depending on your environment, we can select different deployment sizes. So you can see here in the table that if we've got hosts of 10 or up to 10, and we've got up to 100 VMs, we can select the tiny deployment. And we can go all the way up to extra large, where it will support up to 2,000 hosts or 35,000 virtual machines. So as this is a lab environment, I am just going to leave it on tiny. And the storage size, I'm also going to leave on default. However, you do have the option to allocate a little bit larger storage. So if we click on large, you can see that the tiny deployment has changed up to 1.5 terabytes. And if we click on extra large, you can see it goes up to 3.2 terabytes. So I'm just going to leave it on default, which is 463 gigabytes. and we'll click on next. In this window, we're presented with the data stores from our management vCenter server. So I'm just going to go ahead and select the data store that I want to place this virtual machine into. Now, as you can see up on screen, the data store that I've selected is an SSD data store. So once you have your one selected, then go ahead and click on next. Now here we configure the network settings of the appliance. So first up, we're going to select our management network. My management network is called Site A-MGMT. For IP version, we'll leave this as IPv4, and IP assignment, we'll also leave this as static. And for the fully qualified domain name, I'm going to type in vc7-1.vmlab.local. Now the fully qualified domain name is very important. If you do get this wrong, the installation will fail. So what we need to do is we need to set up a forward and reverse lookup within your DNS servers. So in my environment, I do have Active Directory set up. So I've set up a forward and reverse lookup for vc7-1.vmlab.local. And if you haven't done that before, I do have a video that I'm going to place up on screen here. And that walks you through how to set up a Windows 2019 Active Directory domain controller, as well as setting up forward and reverse lookup zones. So check that out if you are not familiar with setting those up. For the IP address, I'm going to type in 192.168.1.214. My subnet mask is going to be 255.255.0, and the default gateway is 192.168.1.1. Next, I'll enter in my DNS servers. So I only have one Active Directory domain server in my lab, so that IP address is 192.168.1.101. For the common ports, we're going to be leaving those as port 80 and port 443. So we'll go ahead and click on next. And here we're displayed with a summary of all the settings that we've entered so far within this installer. So just scroll down, make sure all your settings are correct. If you need to make any changes, you can click on the back button and make those changes. But once you've verified they are all correct, we can then go ahead and click on the finish button. And stage 1 is now deploying. So we're at the stage of deploying the virtual machine within the management vSphere environment. And you can see on the left-hand side there that vc7-1 virtual machine has just been created. And you can see the task as deploy OVF template. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pause the video here, and then I'm going to come back once the stage 1 is complete, and then we'll continue with the video just because it's going to take a little bit of time. All right, we'll see you guys soon. We're back, guys, and stage 1 is now complete successfully. So let's go ahead and click on continue. And you can see up on screen that we're going to start stage 2 now. So we're going to go ahead and click on next. Here we're going to set up our time synchronization. I'm going to be synchronizing my time to my Active Directory PDC. So I'm going to drop this down and select synchronize time with NTP servers. And in here I'm just going to put the IP address of my Active Directory PDC. Once we've done that, we can then decide to enable or disable SSH access to your vCenter server. I'm going to select enabled, and we're going to go ahead and click on next. Now with vCenter 7, there is no longer any external PSCs, so everything is embedded into the one virtual machine, which is awesome and way less complicated. Now in this screen, what we're going to do is we're going to set up the SSO domain. So by default, you're going to have vSphere.local. And for this lab, I'm just going to leave it as vSphere.local. We're then going to type in the password that we wish to use with our administrator account. And we're going to type that in again just to confirm it. So now that we've got all this information filled out, we'll go ahead and click on next. Here we have the option to join the VMware Customer Experience Improvement Program. I'm going to leave mine on join or enabled. And just take note here that you do need to be joined to this program if you want to use VMware Skyline services. So if you're not sure what VMware Skyline is, I'm going to post a link in the description below for this video, and go ahead and check that out. Now I'm going to click on next. And like with stage 1, we've got a summary of all the settings that we've entered in so far. If you're happy with those, we'll go ahead and click on finish. If you do need to make any changes, you can click on the back button. So I'm going to go ahead and click finish. And you'll just be presented with this warning on screen saying that you can't pause or stop the installation once it begins with stage 2. So I'm okay with that. We're going to go ahead and we're going to click on OK. And you can see that the configuration is about to start. So like with stage 1, it's going to take a little bit of time to complete stage 2. So what I'll do is I'm going to pause the video again and we'll come back shortly. The vCenter server installer is now completed stage 2 and everything is looking successful. So we can see here that we can click on the domain name and we'll be taken to the vCenter server web page or the web UI, which with vCenter server 7, it's going to be HTML5 only. So we'll click on the link here and we'll accept the certificate and we'll click on Launch vSphere Client HTML5. Now within this first screen, we're going to enter in our administrator at vSphere.local user account and password. And there we have it. We've logged in successfully to our vCenter 7 server. Now we're in the web user interface here. We can also log into the appliance and have a look at how the appliance is performing and also perform a few other settings there. Now to log into the appliance web interface, we are going to use the same domain name. So we'll copy this bit, https://vc7-1.vmlab.local, and we'll go over to a new tab and we'll paste that in here. However, we're going to change the last part of the URL to colon with port 5480. So once you've done that, you can go ahead and press on enter. And here we're going to use root as the username. And then we'll go ahead and we'll enter in our password, which is the password we set up in the installation wizard. And that successfully logs us into the appliance web user interface. Now within here, you can see that there are quite a few options on the left-hand side. However, we're going to leave that for a vCenter server part 2 video. And the reason why I'm going to do that is because this video, I just want to concentrate on the installation. And we're going to be moving on now to some automation and automating the installation of vCenter 7 server. With vCenter 6.7, I did combine it all into the one video, and I think it was just a little bit too long. So it ran for about 48 minutes. And I think it's better just to separate those and concentrate on individual components. So that's a great segue into moving on to our CLI installation. The GUI installation, it is fun if you do it the first time, the second time, maybe the third time, but after that, it just takes too long. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move on to automating our vCenter 7 server installation. And we really only need two things here. We need the CLI installer and we need one JSON file. Now, don't worry if you don't know what the JSON file is. I'm going to show you all of this right now and make it extremely simple for you, where you can just grab a file, make a few changes, and you also can deploy this in your lab very easily. So what we're going to do is we'll minimize Chrome and we'll close our server installer here. And actually, before we move on, we're just going to go back to our original vCenter server, which is the management vCenter server. We can see that we've got VC7-1 here, and we're going to power it off and then delete it. So it's powered off now. I'm going to right click and select delete from disk and select yes. And that's it. So the vCenter server that we just deployed is now deleted. It is not in the system at all. We're going to return back to our ISO file. So if we still got that mounted, if you remember, we were in the vCsa UI installer and then the Win32 folder. So we're going to go back to the root and we're going to go into vCsa CLI installer folder. Now within here, I just want to show you the templates folder. So if we double click on templates, and we click on install because we're installing a new vCenter server, you can see that we've got a few templates here, or JSON files. So it depends on your situation, whether you're installing your vCenter server directly to an ESXi server, or you're deploying your vCenter server onto another vCenter server, which is what we're doing. And then you also have the same options to deploy onto ESXi or vCenter for vCsa replication. So I'm going to right click on the vCsa on VC JSON file, and we're going to click on edit with Notepad++. Now up on screen, we have the JSON file that we're going to be using to deploy our new vCenter 7 server appliance. And what I'll do is we'll zoom in on this and we'll have a look at some of the settings that we're using. First up, we've got our host name. So the host name vcenter.vmlab.local. This is the vCenter that's controlling my management vSphere environment. So if you remember, we connected into that using the web UI at the beginning of this video. And that address is vcenter.vmlab.local. We then enter in the username and password to connect to that vCenter server. And we select the deployment network. So this is going to be the network that's going to be attached to our new vCenter 7 server appliance. We then type in the data center name. So the data center within my management vCenter server is called VMLab. We then select the data store that we're going to be deploying our new vCenter 7 server to. So you can see there I'm deploying it to VLab A MGMT-SSD. And the target is going to be the cluster names. We then go down to the appliance settings and we're going to set thin disk mode to true and the deployment option to tiny. And the name of our VM is going to be called vcsa-1. Now if I scroll down a little bit, we then move on to the network settings and we make sure the IP family is set to IPv4. The mode is static and the system name that we're using, which is our DNS name where we had to set up that forward and reverse lookup for, is called vc7-1.vmlab.local. We then type in the IP address, the prefix or the subnet mask, so 24 equals 255.255.255.0, and my gateway on that network is 192.168.1.1. And finally, for the network settings, we then enter in our DNS server address. So mine is the Active Directory server where the DNS server is located, and that IP address is 192.168.1.101. Under OS, we then set the root password that we want to set. We then set the NTP server. So remember, we're pointing that to our Active Directory PDC server. So mine is 192.168.1.101. And we enable SSH by setting that value to true. For the SSO administrator, you can see that we set the password there. And then we also set the domain name as vsphere.local. And if we move all the way to the bottom, the last setting that we have here is to enable the customer experience improvement program. So we set that to true. Once we have all these settings, we're going to save the file and then we're going to jump into the command prompt. Once the command prompt opens up, we want to browse to our DVD drive. So in my case, that's E drive. And then we want to change directory to vcsa-cli-installer and then change directory to Win32. Once we're in there, we can type in dir to have a look at the contents. And the exe file that we're going to be using is vcsa-deploy.exe. Now up on screen, we have the entire string that we're going to be using to deploy our vCenter 7 server. If we zoom in on it, you can see that first up we've got the application. Then we have the option install because we're installing a new appliance. We then accept the end user license agreement. And we acknowledge the customer experience improvement program. We then go on to turn off certificate verification. And then we have the path to our JSON file that has all our settings that we're going to be using for this deployment. Now, once you've got all that typed out, you can go ahead and press enter and the deployment will begin. So this is going to do stage 1 and stage 2 in one bang. So once it's finished, we will have a working vCenter server. So I'm going to press enter. And I'm just going to minimize this window a little bit. So you can see up on screen there that it just went through and did a ping of the IP address and then tried to do a forward and reverse lookup of the DNS name. Now, as you can see on our vCenter server, it is deploying the OVF. And this is going to take some time because it is going through all the exact same setup as what we did in the GUI. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause this and then we'll come back once it's finished. And we'll have a look through the CLI output. Okay guys, we are back and the deployment has now completed successfully. On the right hand side in the CLI, we have a log of all the things that have been set up and installed on our vCenter 7 server. And on the left hand side, we have the vCenter 7 virtual machine. Now what we'll do is we'll just drag that up into our vSphere 7 folder. And then what we'll do is we'll go to the vCenter 7 HTML5 user interface. We're presented with the certificate warning again, so we'll click on Advanced and click on Proceed. and then we'll click on Launch vSphere Client HTML5. Once at the login screen, we'll enter in administrator at vsphere.local along with its password. And there we have it. We have our vCenter server deployed. So the last bit, we'll just go into the appliance web interface and just check out what's happening there. Now just to remember that the appliance uses port 5480 to log into the user interface. And once you're there, you want to log in with the username root and then its password. And once you're logged in, you're presented with the summary screen. If we just click on networking on the left-hand side, you can see that we have the host name, the DNS server, the IP address and subnet mask, and also the default gateway. So these were all the settings that we entered into our JSON file. Now that completes this video on how to install the vCenter 7 server appliance using the GUI and CLI methods. If you like this video, please leave a big thumbs up and hit the subscribe button if you're not already a subscriber, and all that good stuff. Stay healthy, stay happy, and we'll see you again in the next video. Bye for now.